The weeks following Edward's arrest transformed Sterling Industries into a battleground of corporate restructuring and family reckoning as attorneys swarmed through decades of financial records, uncovering layers of deception that went far deeper than anyone had initially suspected, involving offshore accounts and fraudulent contracts that implicated not just Edward, but several executives who had been complicit in the schemes. Alexander threw himself into the investigation, working 18-hour days alongside the forensic accountants and federal investigators, while Isabella managed the day-to-day operations and worked to restore investor confidence through transparent communication and strategic reassurance that Sterling Industries would emerge from this crisis stronger and more ethical. Victoria had been placed under house arrest pending investigation into her knowledge of Edward's activities, and while the evidence suggested she had not directly participated in the embezzlement, she had clearly turned a blind eye to irregularities that a competent CEO should have caught and addressed years ago. Marcus Whitfield officially accepted the position of CEO, bringing decades of experience and a reputation for integrity that helped stabilize the company's stock price and reassure clients that Sterling Industries remained a reliable partner despite the scandal that dominated financial news coverage. Isabella found herself spending more time with Alexander than she had since their honeymoon as they worked side by side rebuilding what his family had nearly destroyed, and she watched him transform from the charming but conflict-avoidant man she had married into someone willing to make difficult decisions and face uncomfortable truths. Late one evening, as they reviewed partnership agreements in Alexander's home office, he suddenly closed his laptop and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch because she recognized that expression from the night they met, when he had crossed a crowded ballroom to introduce himself with a confidence that had both attracted and intimidated her. He told her that before they married, he had been afraid of losing his family's approval, afraid of disappointing his mother, and afraid of standing up for what he believed in, because the Sterling family had always valued unity and loyalty above individual conscience or moral courage. But watching Isabella face Victoria's attacks with grace and strength had shown him what real courage looked like, and he was ashamed that he had not recognized sooner that his mother's definition of loyalty actually meant complicity in maintaining a toxic system that hurt everyone, including himself. She reached across the desk, taking his hand and telling him that love meant growing together and learning from each other, and that she had not fallen in love with him expecting perfection, but rather seeing his potential and his genuine kindness that had survived despite being raised in an environment that valued manipulation over honesty. Alexander stood, pulling her up into his arms, kissing her with a passion and desperation that spoke of nearly losing something precious and finding it again, transformed and more valuable than before. They made love that night, not with the tentative exploration of newlyweds still learning each other, but with the fierce intensity of two people who had fought for their relationship and won, claiming each other with a certainty that had been tested by fire and emerged unbreakable. The next morning, Isabella woke to find Alexander already dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed, watching her with an expression of such tender adoration that she felt tears prick her eyes, because this was the man she had hoped to find beneath the layers of family obligation and social expectation. He told her that he had made a decision that would change everything, and asked if she would trust him, even though he could not explain the details yet, because some things required perfect timing and careful execution to achieve the results he was planning. She studied his face, seeing determination and excitement and a hint of nervous anticipation, before nodding and telling him she trusted him completely, because trust was the foundation they had been building brick by brick through every challenge and every moment of choosing each other over easier paths. 3 days later, Alexander called an emergency meeting of the Sterling Industries Board of Directors, and Isabella arrived to find not just board members but also Richard and a team of attorneys from Titanium Global, along with several people she did not recognize but who carried themselves with the confidence of major players in the corporate world. Marcus Whitfield opened the meeting, explaining that Alexander had brought forward a proposal that required board approval and represented a fundamental restructuring of Sterling Industries' ownership and strategic direction. Alexander stood, his voice steady and clear, as he announced that he was proposing a merger between Sterling Industries and Titanium Global that would create a new entity combining the strengths of both companies while eliminating the toxic leadership and corrupt practices that had nearly destroyed his family's legacy. The room erupted in shocked conversation as Alexander continued explaining that he had spent weeks in confidential negotiations with Richard, working out terms that would protect Sterling Industries employees and clients while bringing in the management expertise and ethical framework that Titanium Global had demonstrated throughout its rise to industry dominance. Victoria would be completely removed from any leadership position, and her shares would be transferred to a trust managed by independent trustees, ensuring she received financial support but no decision-making power over the company her negligence had nearly ruined. Isabella sat frozen, trying to process what Alexander had done, because this was not just a business decision, but a complete repudiation of his family's control and a public declaration that he valued integrity and partnership with her over maintaining the Sterling family dynasty. Richard stood, speaking directly to the board members about his vision for the merged company and his respect for Alexander's courage in proposing such a radical solution, and his pride in his daughter who had demonstrated the leadership and strategic thinking that made this partnership possible. The board voted, with only 2 dissenting voices, to approve the merger, and Alexander caught Isabella's eye across the boardroom with a look that conveyed both triumph and vulnerability, as if asking whether she was proud of him or horrified that he had fundamentally altered his family's legacy. After the meeting ended and the board members departed, discussing legal details and implementation timelines, Isabella found Alexander standing alone at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders tense. She approached quietly, wrapping her arms around him from behind and pressing her cheek against his back, feeling his heart beating rapidly beneath her hands, as if he had just run a marathon or jumped off a cliff, trusting that someone would catch him. He turned in her embrace, his eyes searching her face for judgment or approval or understanding, and she kissed him softly before telling him that what he had done required more courage than most people possessed, because choosing principle over family loyalty was perhaps the hardest decision anyone could make. Alexander pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair, and she felt wetness against her neck, realizing he was crying with relief and grief and the complex emotions of someone who had just severed ties with a toxic past while simultaneously feeling the weight of that loss. They stood together as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Isabella thought about how far they had come from that wedding reception where she had wondered if love would be enough to survive the war his family had declared. Richard found them there 20 minutes later, clearing his throat politely, before telling them both that he was proud of the partnership they had built and the company they were creating together, and that sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you were born into. He also mentioned, with that dangerous smile Isabella knew so well, that Victoria had been informed of the merger terms and apparently had thrown a crystal vase at her attorney before being sedated by her personal physician, which suggested she was taking the news about as well as could be expected. Richard laughed, a genuine sound of relief and dark humor, before thanking Alexander for everything he had done to protect Isabella and expose the corruption that had been rotting Sterling Industries from the inside for far too long. Richard clasped Alexander's shoulder with the respect of one leader, acknowledging another before leaving them alone again, and Isabella realized that her father had just given Alexander his approval, not as a son-in-law to be tolerated, but as an equal partner worthy of his daughter. That evening, they returned home exhausted but somehow lighter, as if the weight of family expectations and corporate corruption had finally been lifted off their shoulders, allowing them to breathe freely for the first time since their wedding. Alexander ordered takeout from their favorite restaurant, and they ate sitting on the floor of their living room, laughing about the shocked expressions on the board members' faces and planning the future of the merged company with the enthusiasm of people who finally shared a common vision. Later, as they prepared for bed, Isabella caught Alexander watching her in the bathroom mirror with an expression of wonder, as if he still could not quite believe she was real and had chosen him despite everything his family had done. She turned, facing him, and asked what he was thinking, and he told her that he had spent his whole life trying to be the person his mother wanted him to be, and it had taken meeting Isabella to realize that the person he wanted to be was someone worthy of standing beside her.
6 months after the merger, Titanium Sterling Global officially launched with a press conference that dominated business news coverage and sparked intense speculation about the future direction of the newly formed corporate powerhouse that combined decades of Sterling Industries market presence with Titanium Global's innovative approaches and ethical leadership. Isabella stood on stage beside Alexander and Richard, fielding questions from journalists about the integration process and the strategic vision guiding the merged company, while cameras flashed and investors watched stock prices climb in real time in response to the overwhelmingly positive market reception. The transformation had not been easy, requiring countless hours of negotiating contracts and integrating systems, and managing the human cost of restructuring that had resulted in some executives choosing to resign rather than accept the new ethical standards and accountability measures. But the company that emerged was stronger and more dynamic than either organization had been separately, with Isabella serving as Chief Strategy Officer and Alexander as Chief Operating Officer, working under Richard's guidance while learning to lead a global enterprise that now employed over 50,000 people across 3 continents. Victoria had been moved to a private facility specializing in mental health treatment after a complete breakdown following the merger announcement. And while Isabella felt no satisfaction in her former mother-in-law's suffering, she also recognized that some people could not adapt when their toxic power structures collapsed. Edward was serving a 10-year sentence in federal prison after pleading guilty to fraud and embezzlement charges, and several of his co-conspirators had also been convicted in trials that exposed the depths of corruption that had infected Sterling Industries for decades. Jennifer had been promoted to Isabella's executive assistant and had proven invaluable in managing the complex schedules and endless demands that came with running a multinational corporation, while also serving as a trusted confidant who understood the personal costs of professional success. Alexander had blossomed in his new role, discovering a talent for operational efficiency and team building that had been suppressed under his mother's controlling leadership, and Isabella watched with pride as he earned the respect of employees and executives who had initially been skeptical of his capabilities. Their marriage had deepened into something profound and unshakable, forged through crisis and strengthened by their shared commitment to building something meaningful together, rather than simply maintaining inherited privilege and outdated family dynasties. Late nights at the office frequently ended with them making love on the couch in Isabella's office or Alexander's, or sometimes in the executive conference room after hours when the building was empty and they could indulge in the thrill of claiming their professional space as personal territory. Richard had stepped back from day-to-day operations, focusing instead on mentoring the next generation of leaders while serving as chairman of the board and providing strategic guidance that helped navigate complex international negotiations and emerging market opportunities. One evening, Isabella arrived home to find Alexander waiting with champagne and roses and an expression of barely contained excitement that made her immediately suspicious, because her husband had never been good at keeping secrets and his face always betrayed when he was planning something. He led her to their bedroom where he had covered the bed with photographs and documents, and as she looked closer, she realized they were property listings for a private island in the Caribbean, complete with architectural plans for a house that looked like something from a dream. Alexander explained that he had been working with architects and designers to create a retreat where they could escape the pressures of corporate leadership and remember what had brought them together in the first place, and he wanted her input on every detail because this would be their sanctuary built together. Isabella felt tears stream down her face as she realized that this man, who had once been afraid to stand up to his mother, had learned not just courage, but also romance and thoughtfulness, and the importance of creating spaces where love could flourish away from boardrooms and business deals. She kissed him with all the passion and gratitude and love that had been building through months of working side by side and fighting battles together and claiming their right to build a life on their own terms. They made love surrounded by the scattered plans for their island retreat, and Isabella thought about how far they had traveled from that wedding reception where Victoria had looked at her with contempt to this moment where she and Alexander were partners in every sense, building both a business empire and a marriage that could weather any storm. The next morning, they announced to Richard that they would be taking a month-long honeymoon, having never properly celebrated their marriage due to the immediate crisis that had consumed their first year together. Richard laughed, telling them the company would survive their absence and that he had been young once and understood the importance of prioritizing relationship over responsibility, at least occasionally when the business was stable and the major fires had been extinguished.
Isabella and Alexander flew to Bali, staying in a private villa where they could wake without alarms and spend days exploring temples and beaches and discovering each other again without the weight of corporate expectations and family drama. One afternoon, as they lounged by their private pool, Alexander told Isabella that marrying her had been the best and bravest decision of his life, and that he was grateful for every challenge they had faced, because it had transformed him from someone who drifted through life avoiding conflict into someone who fought for what mattered. She traced patterns on his chest, telling him that love was not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone worth fighting for and fighting beside, and that she had known from that first meeting that beneath his charming exterior was someone capable of great strength if given the right reasons to be strong. They returned from their honeymoon, tanned and relaxed, and more deeply connected than ever before, ready to face whatever challenges the merged company and their complex lives would throw at them. Titanium Sterling Global continued to thrive under their leadership, earning recognition not just for financial performance, but also for ethical business practices and innovative approaches to corporate social responsibility that reflected Isabella's values and Richard's vision. Alexander surprised everyone, including Isabella, by announcing a major initiative to create scholarships and mentorship programs for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, giving them opportunities that he acknowledged he had taken for granted due to his privileged upbringing. The Sterling family name had been redeemed not through defending toxic traditions, but through the courage to acknowledge past failures and build something better and more meaningful that would impact thousands of lives across the globe. Isabella stood before shareholders at the annual meeting 3 years after that fateful wedding day and reported record profits alongside record employee satisfaction and record charitable contributions, proving that ethical leadership and financial success were not opposing values, but complementary forces. After the meeting, Alexander found her in her office and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with the passion that had never dimmed despite the demands of running a global enterprise and the inevitable stresses of balancing professional and personal lives. He told her he loved her more every day and that watching her lead with such grace and strength and compassion made him want to be better and do better and never stop growing into someone worthy of her partnership. Isabella kissed him back, tasting champagne from the celebration and feeling grateful for every battle they had fought and every moment of doubt they had overcome and every choice they had made to prioritize their relationship over easier paths. That evening, they attended a charity gala where Richard was being honored for his philanthropic work. And as Isabella watched her father accept the award, she felt overwhelming gratitude for the man who had taught her strength and strategy, but also compassion and the importance of using power to protect rather than dominate. Alexander squeezed her hand, seeming to understand what she was feeling, and she leaned against him, knowing that together they had built something rare and precious, a love that had survived attempts to destroy it and emerged stronger and more beautiful. The final speech of the evening was given by Marcus Whitfield, who had retired as CEO but remained on the board, and he spoke about the transformation of Sterling Industries into Titanium Sterling Global and the leadership that had made it possible, praising Isabella and Alexander for their courage and partnership. As they drove home that night, Alexander told Isabella that he wanted to start a family, and she felt her heart skip because they had been so focused on building the company that they had not discussed children or the future beyond quarterly earnings reports and strategic plans. She told him she wanted that too, wanted to raise children who understood both privilege and responsibility, who learned that love required courage and that family was something you built through choice and commitment rather than simply accepting whatever toxic dynamics you inherited. They made love that night with new tenderness and purpose, creating not just pleasure, but possibility. And Isabella fell asleep in Alexander's arms, thinking about the future they would build together, one that honored the lessons they had learned while moving forward into something bright and hopeful. 6 months later, Isabella stood in their bathroom, staring at a positive pregnancy test while tears of joy streamed down her face. And when Alexander came home from work, she showed him the test,
and watched his expression transform from confusion to shock to overwhelming happiness. He lifted her, spinning her around before carefully setting her down and placing his hand on her still flat stomach, and telling her that her child would be so lucky to have her as a mother, teaching strength and compassion and the courage to stand up for what is right. Isabella kissed him, thinking about how far they had come from that wedding reception where she had wondered if love would be enough, and now knowing with absolute certainty that love combined with courage